We are going to be reviewing information we know about Entity Framework Code first, and we're going to be creating an MVC Music Store app. And then we're going to move forward and learn some new information about how to sort our views, how to filter, which basically involves searching through data, and how to create multiple pages in our views, and also how to group data and display statistics. And that will involve creating a view model. So first, we're going to start with a little review of the code first process. And at this point, we've created a couple of applications that are using code first. And this information on DB context and DB set is a quick review, and hopefully will solidify some of the concepts. So Entity Framework refers to a class that is derived from DB context as the context class. And the purpose of DB context is to kind of act as a bridge between your classes, which are the entities, and the database. And the DB context is basically responsible for querying the database. It's responsible for tracking all the changes, and it handles the CRUD operations, in addition to the relationships among your entity sets, which are your tables. Okay, and so here this little graphic just kind of shows that it is the bridge between the classes and the database. And a little review of the terminology. Entity set corresponds to a table. Entity refers to more of a row within the table. DB set is a collection of your entity classes that define the tables in your database. And so here is a little example of what we're going to be using for our music store. And you can see we've got DB set, and then we've got the names that we're going to be giving our tables. DB context comes with several methods and properties. So I've listed the methods here, but I think what will be more useful for you is this little table where I've got the methods listed, and then I've got an example of how they are used. Because with code first, the controllers are generated, this code has been generated for us, and now we're going to kind of take a little deeper look into what it's doing. So for add, what this is doing is it's adding the given entity to the context with the added state. So basically, it is preparing to add a row to your table. Okay, that's what that means. When the changes are saved, the entities, which would be row or rows, in the added state are inserted into the database, which means the row or rows are added. Okay, and so at that point, when the insertion takes place, then the object state kind of resets to unchanged. And we talked about how that reset happens last week. So an example of the code that you would see in a controller would be dbcontext.students.add, and then this is referring to the row. Attach entity, basically this entity was passed as a parameter, and it attaches the entity or the row to the context. And at this point, it's unchanged. Okay, and this is the code that you would see for that. Create creates a new instance of the entity. And keep in mind, entity is row. So this is going to be a new row in our table. Find. So what find does is it searches the table for the primary key value. Okay, so the thing that you have to note here is that whatever find is looking for by default is going to be a primary key value. So if it doesn't find anything, it's going to return null. Otherwise, it is going to return the very first occurrence that it finds. So include is used for a database query. And we'll be taking a look at the link code today, but the link code is used for querying the database in your MVC app. So you can see that we have a variable called student list, and it's including student address. It's sending that to the list. And this is another example. And this one would be strongly typed because it is using the Lambda code. For remove, so this would be marking a row for deletion. And remember, you mark a row for deletion, and then when you save the changes, it's actually deleted. So here we've got students.remove. This would be the row. And at this point, it's just marked. And then usually the next command that you see in the controller will save your changes. And SQL query, this creates a raw SQL query that will return the entities or the rows in this set. Okay, and so here you can actually see the SQL query in parentheses. And we're going to take a closer look at the code that you're seeing in those controllers today. So, code first processing. The procedure for code first is we create our data models and we run a build. Then we add Entity Framework to the project using NuGet. Then we create our data access layer, and this is a folder. In that folder, we put our context class file and our initializer, and then we run a build. After that, we have to modify web config, and we have to give it a connection string, and we have to give it the context. In the connection string, this is where we specify the name of our database file. And in the context, this is where we tell it about the initializer. Once we have web config set, then we can use Entity Framework to generate the controllers and the views. And after we generate those, we would customize the layout to include action links to the various index views that we generated. And then we would go in and customize the various views with our own branding. So that is the process, and we're going to be walking through that process to create the MVC Music Store.